been a bit of a crazy week for JavaScript. You might have already seen my video about structs, which brings the best of memory-safe languages like Rust into JS, or my video about JS Sugar / JS Zero, the weird splitting of the language. But there's also a bunch of other cool new features that were talked about in this legendary TC39 meeting. It's one of the most productive I've ever seen in terms of the good, bad, ugly, and all these cool features that are moving along. A lot of things just made it to stage 4, and it is time to cover what the future of JS is likely going to look like. Most of these features are ready to go. Many will be in the browser by the end of the year. The rest will be coming soon after, and a bunch that might come out eventually, might not. But all of them are really interesting. I think most are worth talking about, and I can't wait to show you guys the crazy, crazy results. Just look at how many tabs I have open here of all these cool new features. Sorry for the runtime of this video. I promise it's worth it. Do you know what else is worth it? A quick word from today's sponsor. The thought of an AI tool that reviews your code for you wasn't particularly exciting to me until I learned two important details. First, it's really cheap, and if you're open source, it's fully free. And second, much more importantly, the reviews are actually good. I could tell you all about it, but instead I'm going to show you. Here's a real PR I recently filed for my tool Marker Thing for managing markers for my filming. I added some tagging and auto filtering features really quickly last night before going to bed, and not only did they summarize the change for me, they actually caught some mistakes that I was surprised by. They make refactor suggestions, which are good. This was some, I'll be honest, code that was generated by Claude. So the fact they called it out and showed me a much better way to write it, actually quite nice. I'm probably going to make that move. That's cool and all, but what about actual mistakes? This tool is built to generate markers for me, including my YouTube chapters. But when I refactored it, I actually screwed up the code for the chapters, and somehow they were able to correctly identify that the format was incorrect, that I had the label before the timestamp, which doesn't work. So they corrected it here and gave me a one-click auto commit button that I used. That's why it's grayed out. In the GitHub UI, they provided the fix and a button to auto apply it. What? It was just my small side project, that's one thing, but here is them being similarly useful in actual code. This is a funny one where they called out that Internet Explorer 11 is deprecated, we should probably stop supporting it. And they even gave us an auto-apply diff and kickstarted a conversation between my team. Here is them catching a typo and giving you one click to automatically fix it. It's real useful stuff. The types of nitpicky crap that you're tired of finding in reviews, they just do it for you. And you can be rude to them too, because they're a robot, not a real person. They've changed how I do code reviews, and they might change it for y'all as well. Go give CodeRabbit.ai a shot. I've been super, super impressed. Thank you to CodeRabbit for sponsoring today's video. Rob Palmer, as always, has done a great job of covering all the things going on and trying their best to break it down on Twitter, but I've already taken all of these and pulled up the official proposals. There are some fun things in here. Array zip is very fun. I believe it got advanced to 2, if I recall. Yeah, all of the up arrows mean that it is going up a stage. So array zip, despite not having it called out here, is now at stage 2. One of the cool features coming to iterators, which are the less adopted but more powerful way to iterate through things in JavaScript, is zip, which lets you take 2 arrays and create tuples pairing values from it. Curious if we do the zip keyed. I just want to see what the results look like here. Oh, that's actually kind of cool. So what this allows you to do is take multiple arrays and then group values at the same index into separate things. Like here, we grouped 0.0, which A has 0, B has 3, C has 7. So we get those values there. Then index 1 is 1, 4, and 8. So we get that. Index 2 is 2, 5, 9. So we get that. And then the final index gets undefined 6, 10. Where'd the 10 come from? We have this padding at the end, which allows us to pad out any values that are past the buffer if we want to go further. So you can pad C values with your own default once you get past the length. This also is because mode longest was called, so that's why we get the undefined for A there. If you don't specify modes, instead what you will get is it cuts off at whatever the shortest is. So you won't have this 6 encoded anywhere because it cuts off because the shortest only has 3 keys. The important thing to see here is this iterator.zip call, because iterators have this, arrays don't. And this proposal is adding this to arrays, specifically because no one uses iterators. They call it out here. Despite iterators existing for over a decade, it's exceedingly common to use and prefer arrays over iterators, especially for small finite lists. Yeah. Man, I'm going to use the shit out of this in Advent to Code now that I think about it. It's going to be a fun one. Yeah. So array zip is cool for zipping 2 arrays together. Nice. Extractor objects. So foo y equals x. Foo y is x. Nested array destructuring. Very interesting. ECMAScript has no mechanism for executing user-defined logic during destructuring, which means that operations related to data validation and transformation may require multiple statements. Yeah, so toInstant. If you pass a value and you want to make sure it's the right, then we have to do all these checks. We have to see if it's an instant, then we just return it directly. If not, we check if it's a date, then we can transform it. If it's a string, we handle it. Otherwise, we throw an error. You have to write this yourself, and now you can't destructure to do it. So we have book, constructor. This.created@, is toInstant created@, and some effort duplicated if modified at was undefined. With extractors, such validation and transformation logic can be encapsulated and reused inside of the binding pattern. So you have a custom matcher. Interesting. This allows us to define custom matcher that will dump values. So created@'s an instance extractor, created@, and we make sure that's temporal now instant. So extractor created@ is what it's matched to. Interesting. There's also enum coming to the standard or the browser standard soon. That's going to not cause any problems at all, I'm sure. Oh boy. Match X when option, sum when option, none. I do love me some pattern matching. Destructuring, option.sum y is X. This is really fun syntax. This is what I'm excited about, is you can destructure by calling a function and get this value. So it's like writing a custom destructurer. So we've all done this code before. Const state, or like count, set count, typing's hard, equals use state 0. What if we wanted to transform count in some way? What if we wanted these to start as numbers, but we want them to be strings? What this would allow us to do is like extractor.toString, wrap this, and now this functionality gets called during the destructuring before these values get set. That is kind of cool. The ability to, in your syntax like this, destructure. What I don't love is it breaks my mental mapping of const thing. The fact that const can be a function call as the definition now feels really weird to me. Like what I would expect and what we've all done at some point is something like this, but this would require you running it on all of the outputs here when you only want the values that you've destructured. So very interesting. I can see a lot of potential values to this pattern. Yeah, let foo a, b, c equal that. Assignment parentheses are used instead of square brackets for several reasons. It avoids collision with element access expression. It is interesting that it's like a function is how we call it. Ensure consistent syntax between binding and assignment. This is a weird one. I see the benefits. You could also object destructure the same way. Potential win here for sure. Weirder feeling one. People in chat saying crazy how they're just turning JS into Rust. Basically Rust, but messier. Y'all know better than me. This one's going to be mixed for sure. Apparently, ArrayZib was actually stage -1. And the result's going to be it lands on 1, 2, or 2.7. I don't know if those results have been posted yet, but it's being bumped almost certainly. Let's go into more fun ones. Here we have decimal. Built-in exact decimal numbers for JavaScript. We will finally solve the 0.1 plus 0.2 equals 0.3 once and for all. Wouldn't that be wonderful? The precision is specified. Once you pass it the value, it will stay that precision. Historically, JS may not have been considered a language where exact decimal numbers are even representable, to say nothing of doing exact calculations. Some application architectures, JS only deals with string representations of a human-readable decimal quantity, like 1.25 as a string. It never does calculations or conversions. But several trends push towards JS's deeper involvement with decimal quantities, like 0.1 plus 0.2 equals 0.3. Crazy. More complicated front-end architectures, like rounding, localization, other presentational aspects may be performed on the front end for better interactive performance. Serverless systems use JS as a programming language in order to better leverage the knowledge of front-end devs. Server-side programming in JS also benefits with things like Node and Deno. Yeah, and all of those would benefit from having decimals. Cool. Hopefully I don't have to convince you guys that having decimals is a good thing. Structs, which I already mentioned, I have a whole video about. Check that out, because unsafe in JavaScript and struct and having these types of closures that basically turn us into Rust has potential to make JS one of the best multi-threaded languages available. Definitely check this out. I'm quite excited. Iterator chunking. There's been a lot of methods added to Iterator recently, and chunking is one of the cooler ones for sure. As a person who writes a lot of Elixir, or wrote a lot of Elixir, this stuff is really, really cool. If you take an iterator, which you get here by calling an array.values that creates an iterator for it, Digits.chunks allows you now to split it up in whatever size of groups you want for chunking up work, chunking up flows, chunking up your data. Advent of code got so much easier if this ships. This is going to make my life way, way better. I want this bad. Please give us this. Also, like column and grid layouts, when you change the number of things in a grid, I just realized how much this is going to help a bunch of things in doing a pick thing. Fuck. Yeah, I want this bad. Please give me chunks. Originally, sorry, now it's in place. In place, stage 2 update. So this is still in stage 2. It's people from GoDaddy, which is interesting. Adding and updating values of a map are tasks that developers often perform in conjunction. There are currently no map prototype methods for either of those two things, let alone a method that does both. Interesting. So this is, I do this all the time. Like if the map doesn't have the key, you set it. Otherwise, you grab it and do the thing. This is super common. Now, map.inplace, key, insert, value. So this is if it doesn't already exist, we'll insert it, and then we do the thing. This makes the syntax for this type of thing a little less clear, but a lot more powerful. Update or insert, you can have different functions for those two things. Just insert if missing. Previously, you'd have to do the 2 lookups. Now it's just 1. Good. As a person who's been pushing map really hard forever, I have a short from like over 2 years ago where I was saying stop using objects and use maps more. These things are huge for that. Yeah, not having to do 2 lookups each time and just being able to do it as one call. Very nice change. I will use this a lot if they do it. Don't love the syntax, love the concept. Is error. Oh boy. This is a fun one. I believe this got pretty far. Yeah, it's up for stage 2.7, which is the weird in-between stage where things are ready to start being implemented, but aren't quite ready perfect spec-wise. It's just like, feel free to add this to your like compilers now. Brought up concerns to the committee about symbol.toString tag and how previously reliable and unspoofable object.toString calls would now no longer be reliable. The committee consensus was that as long as there were prototype methods for all built-ins that, at the least, threw an error when an internal slot was not present, that would be sufficient to serve as a reliable branding test. This is so you know when you get an error that it's actually the right error or tagged properly to make sure the thing you're processing is what you actually expect. That's less reliable with symbol.toString tag, which would allow you to update an object's toString call directly. The internal slot for error instances and its subclasses is only checked in object.toString itself, leaving no possible reliable test in a world where symbol.toString tag exists. Instance of error, of course, is unreliable because it will provide a false negative with a cross-realm, like from an iframe or from a node VM module error instance. Yeah, this is a big deal. You can't just rely on an instance of error because there are other places where an error comes from where it will no longer be a proper error instance. So you need a way to check that it's reliable. The proposal here is error.isError, that you can pass it an error to and know if it's actually an error or not. It's useful for debugging, serialization, structured cloning, which is actually a big one. You get lots of weird errors when you're cloning things in the browser. Knowing that you're getting native errors is huge. Centralized error collection. Reporting errors from an iframe with the same origin to a top frame where all errors are collected, evaluated, and reported to a personalized server to be investigated at a later time. However, a throw statement can throw any exception with an unknown type of data. The verification is required for the data to be collected. The thrown data instance of error doesn't satisfy error because the thrown error will inherit the error instance of another realm, in this case, where the iframe was from. Meaning content window.error is the abstraction and thrown data instance of, yeah, that's so messy. You have to call, like if you have content window from the iframe, you have to use that binding to check if something's actually an error. The fuck? Yeah, having error.isError to actually know sounds nice. I was hoping this would do more for like knowing what type of error and being able to be stricter with that. People are asking what a realm is. I don't got enough time to explain that one. The TLDR is it is a place that is running JavaScript that is not your specific JS instance, be it a worker, be it an explicit realm or the shadow realm, which I think I filmed a video about that a while ago. I've thought about it enough that I have iframes, stuff like that. Async Context. This is another fun one that is just an update, so it's not advancing, but they're giving an update on where it's at so far. The goal with Async Context is to make it easier to control things within async environment. When writing synchronous JS code, a reasonable expectation from devs is that values are consistently available over the life of the synchronous execution. These values may be passed explicitly, like as a parameter or some nested function, or a closed over variable, or implicitly, like they're pulled from the call stack from outside of scope. So you define it outside, then you call it inside here. explicitly pass the value to a function via parameter. So explicit value, now you have that when you call that function. You can capture by the closure. So in this closure, assert.equals, you'll have access as long as the closure exists. So now if we pass this closure function out, the values will still be there. You can implicitly propagate via shared references to external variables. So this try finally means that these things exist in this context. The value is available for as long as the shared reference is set. In this case, for as long as the synchronous execution of the try finally code. As long as this is going on, these values will still exist. All makes sense so far. Async await syntax improved the ergonomics of writing asynchronous JS. It allowed devs to think of asynchronous code in terms of synchronous code. The behavior of the event loop executing the code remains the same as in a promise chain. However, passing code through the event loop loses implicit information from the call site because we end up replacing the call stack. In the case of async await syntax, the loss of implicit call site information becomes invisible due to the visual similarity to synchronous code. So here we have this async implementation, and since we are awaiting nothing here, the shared reference has been reset to undefined. So shared.key died because it came from a different context, and now we've lost it because it was thrown out. Interesting. This is common in callback style code where you would define a function that accessed a value. That value could get cleaned up and the code could run. I really hope they're not going to try and bring var back here. So here's their proposed solution. Async Context is designed as a value store for context propagation across logically connected sync and async code. So we have a variable that we call async context.variable for, and now we access it with setters and getters instead. Async var.run, interesting. Async context variable runs can be nested, so we can run for B and then run another one inside of here, async var.get to get the value, and then a timeout that does it again after. Very interesting. You can also snapshot all of the current variables at any point if you want to keep them. So you capture the state of all of the variables that exist in this context in this moment. Very interesting. It feels like there's a lot of work to figure out how to share values between async stuff in JS right now. Definitely check this one out if you're curious. Interesting. So span async var.get, span.endtime is date.now. Where does this end function? Oh, this is being exported. So we call tracer.end at the end here after the tracer.run. Very interesting. And when you explicitly call end, that's when the memory gets freed up. Run and end don't share the same lexical scope with actual code functions, and they're capable of async reentrance, thus capable of concurrent multi-tracking. Very interesting. I see a lot of potential here. It's a weird syntax. I'm curious to see what they end up doing with that. Next, shout out Phase, my editor, ESM Phase Imports. So Lucas, one of the champions of this one, works at Dino. Very interesting. The goal is to allow you to import source code to a worker. So if you didn't already know this, workers need to take either source code or a file that is source code. You can't just pass it a module and have it execute. You can just pass something you imported. So what you have to do when you're using a worker is you'd create a URL to a specific JS file relative to import meta URL. You would pass that to the worker to instantiate it. Obnoxious. You have to do all of this work just to instantiate these workers. And this also is nearly impossible to do static analysis for because you can pass a worker URL somewhere like this. So now you don't actually know what bundles are being used in what places, which makes compiling this fucking awful. The proposal is that you can import source. Instead of just importing a module, you can import the source for it, and you can pass that to something like a worker or something like a WASM instance. This lets you move things around. In particular for WASM, this is huge because you could import the source for a WASM thing and then pass it to 3 workers at once and actually analyze this at a code level. I thought they had a WASM call out here. Did they not? I thought this was specifically about WASM. My bad there. I don't know why I thought that. But being able to import the source from something and pass that instead of using these weird URL strings, this is a huge win and will allow for things to be much more optimized by compilers in the future. Not surprising, Dino are the ones pushing this because it benefits them in their compilation, but it's weird. We'll see where it goes. Here's one I'm really excited about, PromiseTR. And it's done. It's so done that the repo is now archived because it's officially part of the standards. Hype. PromiseTR is complete in its 8-year journey. It's achieved stage 4 in TC39. Huge. So exciting. So what is promise.try? Let's take a look at the examples. So the thing to care about here, like why this is cool, is when you call promise.try, it's going to call the rejection case for the promise. You know how you can do .then or .catch on a promise? This lets you take something synchronous that might fail and might not and reject or resolve the promise accordingly. So you don't have to build your own weird shim when working in a promise when you're calling something that might error anymore. Now that shim is part of the promise syntax itself. This is actually really useful when you're calling things that might fail as part of a promise. And you want to be able to catch that as part of the promise syntax going up for async stuff. Really, really cool. Dope that this is finally officially web standards. I know Jordan's been working hard for a long time to get this one pushed, and we're finally there. There's even a spec compliant shim, which means you can call promise.try function throw .catch and it works. That's so nice. I can see this being really useful. A++. Great work, Jordan. Hyped that one finally made it. Been waiting for a while. Another one that made it, iterator helpers. I covered these so much in my last standards video. I have been wanting these forever now. They are better ways to iterate over iterators. So you can do something like call .filter. And now when we're iterating, we'll skip all of the options in this example that aren't even numbers. So we'll skip when we call result.next 0 to 4, and it will skip values and go to the next one when you call .next. There's a ton of these awesome new things being included in the iterator helpers. I am so happy these are now standard and have made it into the browser. Regex modifiers, everyone's favorite. This one also is now stage 4, not archived yet, which is interesting, but all things regex tend to be interesting. And these are pattern modifiers for regex. Common capabilities amongst the majority of regular expression engines is that commonly used by parsers, syntax highlighters, and other tools is the capability to control a subset of regular expression flags, like ignore case, multi-line, single line, extend mode. Modifiers are especially helpful when regular expressions are defined in a context where executable code cannot be evaluated, like a JSON configuration file or TextMate TM language grammar files. We'll investigate each existing and future proposed regex flag to determine whether they are feasible to be used as modifiers. So the goal here is to let you write modifiers as part of the syntax here, which I'm assuming is this guy, the question mark dash I. That's a modifier that controls these other flags within a partial context in a regex. I don't get paid enough to talk about regex. We're skipping to the next one. Temporal. Everyone's favorite. Temporal is making real progress. What is called out here? Any advancing of the stage? No. Yeah, temporal is a crazy standard. See all of the things changing in it constantly? They're working hard to make the best way to use date times in the browser. Y'all have already seen me talk about this a whole bunch. If you haven't, go to my last JS updates video. This one has 3,000 commits in it, I believe. Yeah, 3,717 commits. They're working hard on this one, more than almost any other. So I'm excited for this to finally get to stage 4 and be in the browser. Date times might suck a lot less coming soon. What was the other imports? Oh, ESM phase imports. Okay. That's why I was confused earlier. There's ESM phase imports, which are allowing you to get the source for an ESM module. But the other proposal that was very similar is source phase imports. This is the other one I was thinking of. Lucas also involved in this one. And this allows you to import all sorts of things. In particular, this lets you import WASM bindings and WASM binaries in a way that you can load them elsewhere. So here we are getting const x to be import.source. This isn't a module that I can just call. I can't call x.whatever. This is now the source that I have to load in. So to contrast from earlier, here's a cool WASM example. Import source foo module from foo.wasm. Foo module is an instance of WebAssembly.module. Awesome. Now when we load WASI, which is a different execution solution for calling WASM stuff with an API similar to Node's WASI, I can now pass it this source that I imported, specifically foo module. And we see that here with foo instance is await WebAssembly.instantiate foo module with the WASI snapshot preview coming from the WASI import. This allows us to import and then later on dynamically instantiate a WebAssembly instance using that previous import. This is huge. Instead of having to do some weird custom fetching and compile streaming steps in order to get this data later, it can just be part of your import graph. Real nice change. And I see why, again, the Dino team really wants these things. I'm excited for a future where we can use these to do all sorts of cool stuff with WASM without the syntax being hellish. One last one, because you were asking about it, import defer. Very exciting. Allows you to import later on when you need to instead of importing immediately. So we have the ability to await import, which is cool, but it doesn't always solve the deferral of execution problem since it has to send a network request in such a scenario, which would be a performance regression and not an improvement. A separate network preloading step would therefore still be desirable, but we wouldn't want to prioritize this. If operations is only needed when this function is run, we shouldn't block other imports on it. We should be able to defer this import to happen as soon as everything else is done, but not only happen when you run the function, which is a really cool change where we can import defer something instead, which says, hey, I'm going to use this later. Get it to me when you can. Real nice. Somebody asked about attributes before people get mad at me. Import attributes and JSON modules are now stage 4. These are fun. Import attributes let you specify something like with type JSON. And now when you import it, you have more data, and that will specify what you're importing, which allows your environment to be smarter about the things you are importing. The important detail here is it would be possible for somebody to replace foo.json with JS code that gets executed, which is really dangerous. That's why with type JSON is really valuable, because it means that the import can now be smart enough and only allow for the thing you asked for, which in this case is JSON. And obviously that comes with JSON modules, which allow you to import JSON directly in JavaScript and know it's actually going to be JSON once it's imported. This one, I think, stage 4 now, right? Yeah, though these are being put up for stage 4. I don't know if they made it or not, but very likely. Great changes. Excited for all of these. I think that's everything. There was a lot here. A couple of things I didn't cover because they're way beyond my pay grade. And I'm curious how y'all feel about this. It has been a wild week for JavaScript, and it looks like the future is going to be really cool too, as long as the JS sugar thing doesn't happen. But yeah, that's all I got. And until next time, peace nerds.